Worldbreaker smashed through the first rank of my rubricae, sending 3 of them crashing against the shell-pocked walls. They did not just crash aside in boneless tumbles, they came apart at the joints, their entire suits of armor falling to pieces and clattering against the walls. Whatever sliver of their souls had remained bound by their armor was gone in the time it took me to breathe. Ashur Kai felt it happen as well. He had felt the rubricae die in a way we had not believed possible. "What in the gods' names is that?" he sent to me in scholarly shock. For the shadow of a second it made no sense. All of the other cloned creatures were flawed and wrong. How could this... how... I grasped after my link with Ashur Kai. It is Horus Lupercal, not a child cloned from scraps of tissue and drops of blood. Not an abomination half lost to mutation's touch and trapped inside a containment tank. It was Horus Lupercal, the first Primarch, Lord of the Space Marine Legions. Perhaps a touch younger looking than when any of us had last seen him, and clearly devoid of the Pantheon's touch. But still, Horus Lupercal, cloned from cold flesh harvested directly from his stasis-preserved corpse, wearing the armor stripped from his dead body. Horus Lupercal, clad in his breathtaking black war plate, replete with the long fall of his white wolf fur cloak, and the pale shimmer of a kinetic force field protecting him like a halo. It was Horus Lupercal, charging into our loose ranks and slaughtering us with Worldbreaker. He came from one of the far antechambers, awoken by Fabius in readiness for this moment. To their credit, Leor and the last warriors of the 15 Fangs reacted faster than any of us. Their heavy bolters gave a leonine roar of throaty chatter, kicking and booming as they fired on the War Master of the Imperium, with every bolt hitting home. But even as their bolts tore at Horus's armor and flesh, their initiative did little but doom them before the rest of us. Worldbreaker swung again, hurling 4 of them aside in a single blow. They struck the deck in ragged disarray. I felt Ugrivian die before he even hit the floor. We broke. Gods of the Veil, of course we broke. We did not run, but we broke and fell back, scattering to the edges of the room to escape the war maul of this enraged revenant. My rubricae, much slower than living warriors, marched back in their stately tread, barely pausing as they emptied magazine after magazine of warp-altered shells at the cloned Primarch. And still they died with every swing. Gunfire shattered the Primarch's black ceramite and blew fist-sized chunks of flesh from his bones. Pain threaded his aura, yet Horus fought on. I threw energy at him, I threw lightning, I threw panic and hatred and anger in a seething bolt of mutagenic warp fire. It burst what remained of his force field in a whiplash of air pressure and boiled the skin and hair from his head. Nothing more. I was still too weak, and he was far, far too strong. He came for me then. I raised Cern only to have it smashed out of my hands, sent skidding across the filthy floor. His boot caved in my breastplate, hurling me to the deck. I felt ceramite shards knifing into my lungs as his foot hammered down, pinning me beneath him. I could not reach my cards to summon my bound demons. Never had I needed the ragged knight as I needed him now. Nefertari took to the air, cutting past him and swinging with her clave. She was a silken blur, moving faster than I had ever seen her move. Fast enough to weave between the bolt shells streaming around her, fast enough to slice through the Primarch's cheek, severing half of the muscles in his charred face. But he had weaved aside. She'd missed the killing blow. The female who had killed Legion warlords without shedding a single diamond of sweat had missed her killing blow. Horus was too fast, even for her. I screamed, not from my own pain, but from what I saw next. The Primarch's hand closed around Nefertari's ankle as she twisted in the air for another cut, and he dashed her against the deck. I sensed, rather than heard, the soft bones of her wings snapping like twigs on a forest floor. All sense of her vanished from my mind. Dead or unconscious, I knew not which. That in itself horrified me. She might be dead, murdered by this demigod, and I was too weak to tell. He broke Gyre next. My demon wolf launched for his throat, her claws rending his breastplate as her jaws clamped where the muscles of his neck and shoulder met. She was in the line of fire, helplessly so. Bolt shells from a dozen sources exploded into her and around her, bursting her fur and flesh open. Yet she endured it. She endured it to distract Horus from finishing me, ripping tissue and tendons with every snap of her jaws, every shake of her head. Worldbreaker broke Gyre's grip and crushed her skull, dropping her to the deck like a slab of butcher's meat. Half of her head was simply gone, replaced by a cavernous hole and the spill of gray-red brain matter. Her mortal form began to dissolve, and with it I felt her presence drain from my mind, just as Nefertari's had. Horus turned to me once more. Pain, fury, and wild-eyed hate radiated from what little remained of his face. I struggled to rise, to move, to do anything, but there was no strength left in me. Worldbreaker rose and fell. Another figure slammed into Horus's side, breaking his balance and causing him to stagger sideways as a fresh volley of bolter shells hammered home. The blade that deflected my death in a shower of sparks was my own blade, my axe, Cern, held fast by one of my rubrici. Iskandar, it sent, more clearly and more present in my mind than I'd experienced from any of the Ashen Dead since the night of their curse. I recognized that voice. Mekari, Iskandar, he replied, not in a rubrici's hiss, but a man's voice. Mekari had pulsed to me. To my eternal regret, I was too stunned to reply. He straightened. My brother, my captain. His voice was clearer, more certain, more determined. He turned his featureless gaze back to Horus, who, despite the bolter shells exploding all around and over him, had somehow managed to regain his balance to advance on us. Telemacon's twin swords burst through the front of Horus's ruined breastplate in a spray of almost toxically rich blood. Without a pause, and faster than even Telemachon could withdraw them, Horus grabbed the blades in a single gauntleted fist, snapped them, then spun around and backhanded the swordsman across the chamber. Telemachon hammered into the far wall with the telltale resonant crash of ceramite. Mekari raised my axe again, stepping towards the raging demigod. Farewell, he sent in my mind. Worldbreaker slammed through the axe I had carried since the death of my homeworld. Cern shattered in Mekari's hands, his armor exploded like pottery, and then he was gone. Truly gone. As gone as Ogrivian. My brothers had bought me time to roll away, though not nearly far enough. Horus turned on me, all beauty in his bearing now lost to injury and anger. Try as he might, he had not killed me. I lived, though it had cost me everything. Looming over me, he raised Worldbreaker again, ready to end me as he had the others. A voice stopped him, a single commanding word that cut through the sounds of battle, stopping everything. Even the gunfire fell silent. Enough. Abaddon stood behind Horus. He had not screamed the word, he had barely even raised his voice. The absolute authority in Abaddon's tone was all he required. In his armor, Abaddon was the equal of his father's clone, both in stature and in the fury he emanated. The War Master's name is whispered as a curse on a million worlds in this last dark millennium, with many imperial peasants, those who are even aware of the events that shaped our empire, believing Abaddon to be Horus's cloned son. It would not surprise those superstitious souls to learn that, in that moment, as they both stood before me, only their wounds and their armament set them apart. In all else they were twins. Horus turned in a blur, Worldbreaker swinging in an arc faster than a weapon of its size and weight should ever be able to move. Abaddon not only parried the mace, he caught it, he held it. He gripped it in that great talon stained with the blood of a god and his angel. Father and son faced each other, breathing spite into each other's snarling features. For the first time the Primarch spoke, spit stringed between his teeth. They were clean and unmarked, not etched with Chthonian hieroglyphs as Abaddon's were. That is my Talon. Abaddon closed his fist. Worldbreaker broke as Cern had broken, shattering against a superior weapon. Scrap metal fell from Abaddon's scythed fingers. I have heard the stories of this moment. Perhaps even you, here in the deepest depths of the Imperium, have heard them as well. Every warband has their own reflection of these events. Many are the tales of Horus's last words, his entreaties to his gathered sons and nephews, how he gave a glorious speech about the possibilities of a new era, or how he begged for mercy when faced with Justeran blades. There are even stories that swear Horus was swollen with the blessings of the Pantheon, as he was in the last days of the Terran War, and that the gods themselves had resurrected their fallen champion. But I was there. There were no touching last words or rousing speeches, and the gods, if present at all, remained silent and aloof. Life rarely grants us the same theater as we find in legends. So I promise you this as the account of one who was there that day. There was no divine champion granted sacred rebirth. There was no impassioned judgment delivered by Abaddon as destiny changed hands from one War Master to the next. There was a cloned father and a prodigal son surrounded by the dead and the wounded, so similar that only by their weapons and wounds could I tell them apart. That, and their different smiles. Horus gave a conqueror's smirk from what remained of his face. Recognition, true recognition, flared in the only eye he had left. Ezekiel. His voice was a breath of relief and revelation. It's you, my brother." Time stood still. After everything that had taken place, I thought, against all reason and rhyme, that they would embrace as kindred. "My son," said the Primarch, "my son." All 5 of Abaddon's claws rammed so deeply into Horus's chest that they burst from his back. The scythes pushed out the stunted remains of Telemacon's swords, sending the broken blades clattering against the floor. Dark redness spread across what was left of the white fur cloak draped in tatters across Horus's shoulders. A genetic god's blood rained down over me. I felt like laughing without knowing why. Shock, perhaps. Shock and naked relief. The storm bolter on the Talon's back kicked 3 times, burying 6 bolts inside Horus's exposed chest and neck. They blasted him apart from within, adding viscera to the blood slopping across those of us left prone. And that was how they stood, as gold flared in the eyes of one and life faded from the eyes of the other. Horus's knees buckled, but Abaddon would not let him fall. Horus's mouth worked, but no sound came forth. If his last words found any voice, Abaddon was the only one to hear it. I was fortunate that day, not just because I survived a battle with a demigod that should never have been fought, but because I heard Abaddon's last words to his father. With a slow, smooth withdrawal, he pulled the Talon clear of his father's body, and the moment before Horus fell, the moment before the light finally went out in the Primarch's eyes, Abaddon whispered 5 soft words, "I am not your son.